much more interested in creating a painting out of a reaction. I deliberately change mountains. Fidelity to nature does play an important part. It's just not the literal or descriptive kind. Artist Lynn Schmiel from his book, An Authentic Nature. This is The Artful Painter, art lessons for artists, collectors, and people who love art. Your art lesson today comes from artist Michele Jung. Methodical and keenly observant, Michele Jung creates expressive oil and mixed media paintings that speak to the heart. When you first walk into a room with her paintings displayed on a wall, you may see an expansive seascape, an intimate floral scene, or a quiet landscape. As you move in closer to her paintings, what was once clearly in focus begins to melt and break apart into gorgeous abstraction. Her painting process begins with thoughtful slowness. She then moves in quickly with her brushes and puts down deliberate, confident strokes of paint. Layer by layer, she builds her painting. The result is an impressionistic portal into a world of light and dark, intriguing abstraction, and multiple planes of perspective that arrest our eyes and profoundly stirs our innermost emotions. As you stand before one of Michele's seascapes, for example, you not only see the waves roll in and break upon the rocky shore, you hear the crash of the waves and the smell of the salt in the air. Though Michele's interest in art goes back to her childhood, it wasn't until she turned 40 years old that she started painting. Prior to starting painting, Michele received her bachelor's degree in art history from the Colorado State University. And for a time, she worked a number of jobs, including working in several art galleries. That experience led her to gaining solid skills in selling art. Later, she honed her business acumen when she started and managed an insurance agency. However, her love of art began to assert itself. She keenly wanted to learn how to paint. She began taking workshops from accomplished representational artists, and then at the age of 47, Michele returned to school to earn her MFA in painting. She consistently practiced painting outside as well as in her studio. The result? Michele Jung is an award-winning oil painter today, whose work has been exhibited in a number of group exhibitions and shows. She is a signature member of the American Society of Marine Artists as well as the California Art Club. She is also a member of the Salman Gundy Club and the Guild of Boston Artists. What do we learn from this? Well, her example shows it's never too late to start painting. In this episode, Michele explains her process of painting and how deep observation and outdoor painting and sketching form the foundation for painting from memory her larger studio pieces. In her conversation, she talks about her thoughts on composition, she shares information on the materials she uses and experiments with, and she reveals the surprising reason for her choice of aspect ratios of the surfaces she paints on. She also shares with us her unique approach to marketing her art and brand. It's quite striking. I think you'll find it impressive. And did I mention, she is not only a painter, but she's also a collector of fine art. Now that's someone who truly loves art. My name is Carl Olson, and this is The Artful Painter. Michele, you're in Massachusetts right now, is that correct?
That is, I'm in Wellesley, Massachusetts, my husband's hometown.
Oh, wow. And you originally grew up in Connecticut, from what I understand.
I did. I grew up in Hartford, East Hartford. I was born in Hartford and grew up in East Hartford. It's really pretty right now. It just rained and all the trees are all changed. It's gorgeous.
Nature's varnish. But you also live on the West Coast part-time?
I do. We jump around. Right now, we are going back and forth from Wellesley to Atherton, California, which is outside of Stanford University, Palo Alto area. So it's in the Bay Area.
So you're making this move quite frequently. How does that affect your art?
Well, at first it was very difficult. And because I couldn't really focus for a long time because we were going back and forth maybe every 10 days. So what I did was I made sure I had a studio in both locations. And what I would do is just leave everything, get on the plane, do all my paperwork on an airplane, reading. And then as soon as I arrived at the next location, I go right to the studio and then just pick up where I had left off. I would even freeze in the freezer my paints and the brushes. So I immediately would be able to just start like I had just left 20 minutes ago.
Wow.
So that really helps. And my style of painting is layers, and I like to let each layer dry. And I found that if I had more than 10 days, I would start overworking a piece, or because I work on about 15 pieces at a time at each location, so about 30 paintings at a time. And it really, really helps to be able to be pulled away so I can't touch it anymore. And then it dries completely. So when I come back to do the next layer, you have those beautiful colors coming through underneath the wet paint.
How do you describe your art?
It's realism, but I push to impressionism. Some of my work is abstract. I would say if anyone asked me, I would say probably realism. But it's very loose. My work, when you stand in front of it, it's abstract. It falls apart. And then once you push back 10 feet and 15 feet is preferable, then it all becomes realistic. And I don't know why I do that. It's completely out of my control. Like I stand right in front of the painting. I don't know why it happened. I do know that most of these large paintings that I'm talking about that I'm working on with the layers, they're usually headed to a museum for an exhibition. And I keep in mind that it's seen from far away on the wall. So if someone walks into the room, they're looking 25 feet away. And I want to make sure that it's very clear from there. It draws the viewer in. And then as they get closer and closer, they realize it's all broken up and it's paint. And that's what I prefer.
Why do you think that is? You look at art that has been done over the centuries. Much of it is very realistic and it's beautifully done. But it seems in modern times we have tended toward emphasizing brushstrokes, texture, and abstraction. Why do you think that appeals to people?
I think because I can see the hand of the artist with all the digital photographs, all the smooth advertising, things like that. I think people are wanting to see that something's been handmade. And when you look closely at the brushwork or the textures, it's another way to get into the painting. Instead of the subject matter, you start to look and see things or feel things. So I think that's what draws people.
So it's a contrast to, I guess, the dualism of our existence here. As you mentioned, the polished, the digital versus the texture and the feel of something that's been made.
I appreciate artists who do a very smooth, no brushwork. I can do that. I prefer not to. And mostly because I enjoy brushwork. I just enjoy using everything I can with the edges and the texture. But I admire the smooth texture.
Was it always that way, or have you seen your approach to painting change over time?
I was really loose and not on purpose. I think that I started to get tighter and tighter when I went for my master's degree. The program at the Academy of Art is very classical, and they want you to get everything absolutely perfect. And it made me, really understand how to measure and to figure out a composition perfectly with, drawings and value studies and color studies. And then by the time you got to pick up a brush, it was already perfect. So then when you start to use the brush, you could free yourself at that point.
That's the way I felt as a first grader with finger painting. I loved it.
I know. Yeah.
How do you go about deciding what you want to paint, Michele?
I'm inspired by my surroundings. That this is what I've found. I'm a runner. I've ran my whole life, and I'm outside every day. And it's not that I see something and I immediately stop and say, I need to paint this. It's more where after maybe 100 times going by something, the shape attracts my eye, and it makes me think of a possible composition that may be appealing once it's painted. An example is in my floral series. That's based on a property that we have near the beach in Santa Cruz, California. And I must have walked by the succulents for 15 years. And every time I go by, I make a mental note of the color, how the way the sun's hitting it, texture. And it took probably 10 years before I decided, okay, I'm ready. I know this plant well enough. Because both in my seascapes and my florals, it's about the ideal situation, or I try to get the personality of the plant or the place of the seascape of the area. In order to do that, you have to look at something for a long, long time to see it in all kinds of light in order to get when it's truly representative of itself. For my thesis for my master's degree, I did plein air painting. I painted every single day, the same spot for a year. And that's kind of where I learned that it doesn't matter, what day, if it's cloudy or if it's rainy or there's people on the beach or whatever's happening. It doesn't matter that day. What matters is how I, in my mind, experience this place. And in order to show that, I have to take many, many variables in my mind to create it. So I'll use all kinds of sources. I don't just stop, look, and paint. I will draw, I'll do pen and ink, I'll do plein air studies, I'll take photos. I'll do large paintings. I'll go back and do drawings after large paintings. I completely just keep going over and over and over again until I find what represents what I'm doing the best.
Could you elaborate on the benefit of that detailed observation that you do and using the different mediums to record what you experienced in that spot?
The benefit is that I slow down. So I feel that art is the language. I'm trying to have a conversation with the viewer. And in order to do that, I have to look at the elements and, so they recur over and over again. Each material I use, which is really strange, and I don't know why, I have a different style. And I'm not sure if anyone that I know of also does that.
What do you mean by that? Just to help me understand what you're saying there.
So my pen and inks are very different style than my large-scale paintings. My plein air paintings are a different style than large. When I do figure painting or a portrait, it's a totally different style. And I'm not sure why, but I think what it is that when there's a certain mood or emotion I want to emote in the work, I choose a medium that I think best demonstrates that for me to understand it later on. So if I go to a very busy seaport, I really, even though I have oil paints with me, I'll determine that I need to do a pen and ink because of the amount of lines, the way the lines are connecting. So later on, maybe a year later, or maybe the next week, when I want to revisit that to do a painting in the studio, the pen and ink gives me a different information than a plein air painting would. I tend to do plein air painting only for color swatches. And there's times where all I do is swatches when I'm outside and I never get a painting done. And that's more critical for my information that I need.
Because you're getting accurate color impressions and you're recording those So plein air study, well, I mean, it's just that it's a study for you. It's not the end all be all painting for I don't know, a lot of these events, they're selling, and nothing wrong with that. But it seems like your plein air studies serve a higher purpose in the development of larger works.
I agree. I wish that I could do beautiful plein air paintings on the spot.
Oh, me too.
I really admire everyone who can, and I don't know why it's impossible for me. The only thing I can think of is that I'm being too critical and trying to make a perfect painting that will sell. But if I go out there with the idea that I'm just going to record whatever is happening that is different than the last time I was out there, or if it's a new place, I try to think of what am I seeing that I wouldn't see in another state. Or if I do repetitive days, I'll think, what is different today that, from yesterday? And those are the things I want to jot down, whether it's paint, ink, or drawing. When I do put together, because I do construct my large paintings, I can use the different things from, my notes.
Well, this is interesting. Going back to your earlier question about why different media lends a different style or impression. It seems to me that pen and ink, which I think is an absolutely gorgeous medium, it emphasizes the line, and this, and the paints seem to emphasize shapes and colors and things like that. So they each have their own way of expressing what we see, and we can learn from those. I don't know. I'm just learning, Michele. So these are all guesses.
I'll give you a tip with the ink. So when I was in undergraduate school, we used the classic, the ink well and the metal tip. Now they have pens that are ink, and they have different size heads at the end, and some are almost like a brush. So you can get very fine dots, and then move up slowly in the lines, and then to a brush, a thick brush. So, and this is a pen that has a cap. So what I do is I get a really thin one, and then a medium, and then a large. And when I go out to do drawing, things that are in the foreground, I use the thicker, and then in the midground, I use the medium, and then in the small, I use the really tiny. Yeah, it kind of. I kind of cheat and atmospheric
perspective with pen and ink.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. All right. So are these like the Secura micron pens or something like that? Is that what?
Yes, I think so. I'm not. They're gray. The ones I prefer are gray, and I run through them like water.
Yeah.
I just run them out, and I scribble. I'm not concerned about measuring and things. And I did a series of pen and ink for a solo show that I had in conjunction with the paintings. And it was really interesting because you could see that when I was out on the field, I would just literally scribble as fast as I possibly can to get the feeling of the surface of what I was looking at. And then when I did the painting in the studio, there was more emotion of what was happening in to me, what I was smelling, hearing, feeling. So I thought that was interesting to have two different mediums in one show.
What role does photography have in your studies?
I'm a terrible photographer. It's such an art. I wish that I was a good photographer. All I do is use my iPhone, and I will take pictures. And when I look at them, I'm so disappointed because it never captures what I want it to capture. Every once in a while on a blue moon, I'll have a beautiful photo, and I will post the photo on social media because there's no way I could paint it as beautiful as the photo. For me, the photos aren't very helpful, but I do use them for things like wave patterns. If there's a really great pattern going on, I will photograph that. Now, that doesn't mean that I will use the whole thing. It doesn't mean it'll be the same color. It doesn't mean it's the same day. I can use it for just about anything.
We try to do a painting strictly from a photo, and forgetting that the photo has artifacts that you have to adjust for. Like if you used a wide angle lens, everything's leaning in. I had a friend of mine. He's an artist in Texas. His name is Kelly Bailey, and he really opened my eyes up to what happens with these photos. And you can tell when a person has copied the photo rather than used it as a reference or a memory aid, because they'll have the distorted perspective and that sort of thing in there. But I'm going off on a tangent there. Sorry about that, Michele.
No, that's okay. I think that if someone is a great photographer and can use that photo and do a great painting, that's great. I'm all for it. I just don't have that ability, and I try to push my compositions more than what's normal. I exaggerate to create more energy.
I want to explore that. How do you go about doing that?
Well, it's very detailed, but one thing I can do is in a painting there, maybe a beginner will use 3 planes. They have foreground, middle ground, background.
Right.
And then as you're more advanced, you start using more planes. So you may have up to 7 going backwards. So let's just imagine a seascape, and it has the waves. So you have the sand and the rocks, and then each wave goes back and back and back. So those are each individual planes. But I've discovered that you can invert each plane so you have the illusion of looking down or looking up. And when you work really large and someone's standing in front of the painting, the image wraps around into your peripheral vision. And so it's really important to invert the planes at the base and invert the ones at the top.
Just so I understand, what do you mean by inverting the planes? I mean, how
inverting. So what I'm doing, I did in a demo I showed where I took a piece of paper and I folded it all the way up, so it was almost like a fan.
Right. Okay.
And then I held it up, so each plane represented the fold. And then what I did was I tilted the top a little bit down and the bottom a little bit up. So that plane at the bottom and at the top, the perspective changes within that plane. So I'm not using the same perspective as the viewer's eye. I'm lowering or highering the perspective. So have you seen the statue David?
Yes.
So when you're looking up, the same thing is happening. So the hand, I believe the hand, the head, there's different body parts that are either enlarged or tilted at a different angle than the rest of it. And what that does is makes your eye move towards those areas. But it also gives the illusion of that you're looking up or down or around the figure. So I just applied that to painting, and it works. It's very easy to do.
Beautiful. I've never heard this before. I think this is fantastic.
It's a little advanced, but I think if you think about when you're a beginner and you're just starting off with doing compositions very basic, like triangle, and then when you move, you start to understand the basics. Then you move into using multiple ones in the same painting. So you can use the S curve, and the circle, and the same type of thing. You understand?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Then as you become more masterful, then what you can do is start to manipulate those, and you can start to invert them and start to move them around in the plane.
Very nice.
So you kind of have to work up to that. I think as a beginner, you really want to stick to just getting the basics. When you can start to do multiple ones in one painting to strengthen the painting, then you're ready to move on to inverting those planes.
Yeah. So hopefully I've got my head starting to wrap around this. As a beginner, so here's the things I hear. You have to have a central focal point, the rule of thirds, the golden mean. If you want to take it a step further, those are the things you hear all the time. But a true masterpiece really has much more than just those basics.
Right. So if you're an amateur or a beginner, you're really just copying what you see. You're emulating people's techniques. You're trying to copy things exactly as you see it, and you're usually just one source per painting. And the composition and design basics are really, really simple, and that's where you really want to be until you master that. And then as you move up to a professional, we see all these plein air painters out there competing. Then you become more technically proficient. You can, I see too much information though in these paintings. They tend to do too much. It'd be nicer if people simplify. You start creating with multiple sources, like I was talking about. You can use, photos. You can use plein air paintings. You start to use a bunch of things to build a painting, and then you are proficient in one medium. So usually you'll see a lot of professional painters just doing one thing. And then you start exploring, like I said, the compositions. So you start to do bird's eye, worm's eye, and backlight. Those are more advanced. But you would do those on top of the S-curve. And then your color harmony is great. But you start to adapt repetitive habits. So as a beginner, you're kind of just doing basic. And then as advanced, you do more repetitive. But then as a master, you're creating. So you went from copying to manipulating to, as a master, you start creating things. You have technical freedom. Images are starting to become symbolic in nature. You're creating from memory, which we'll talk about later because that's a big thing I do.
Yeah, sure.
You start exploring new mediums. You start challenging the composition. So you start using new ones and bending, like I said, inverting the ones. You create work in series. So you start working out problems. So like Monet was out there doing the haystacks. He was working on a problem. He wasn't doing a bunch, so he could sell a bunch of haystacks. You start pushing your values. You're using multiple cools and warms. I don't know. You utilize optical color. And you start putting sound, smell, and emotion in work at that level. So, those are just some really basic things, but I think most people, when they start painting as a beginner, they're overwhelmed by the other painters out there.
Yeah.
And they just have to understand if they stick to the basics until they start getting bored. So you know you're ready to move on when you start feeling like, I'm tired of this. I just don't feel like doing this anymore. And that's when you have to say, okay, now I'm going to challenge myself. So instead of doing the S curve, I'm going to do an O and an S. And then that starts to use, I think I could do that. And then it starts to perk you up and you start looking to see where you see that out in nature. And if you can't find it, then you start looking through the history books. And if you can't find it there, then you try it. And then if it works, which it will, if you're designing it yourself, then you feel successful. Learning is more than just copying someone else's technique, but applying your own logic to it.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I do wonder, you see, and this was true of my artwork too when I first started. I call it naive art. Okay. It's just, you look at it and at first you think, oh, that's pretty good. And then you realize, that's pretty naive.
Okay. That's it. When you're a beginner, you're seeking for approval from yourself and from other people.
Yeah.
And then when you get more advanced, it doesn't go away, unfortunately. Then you need group approval. You have to join all the clubs. You have to enter contests, plein air events, and you have to, jury into exhibitions. And then finally, when you're a master, you just don't care. You really don't care anymore. You let go of your ego. That's like, you know, who did you have on your podcast? Lynn Schmell.
Oh, yes.
I mean, do you honestly think he cares about, you know, what anyone thinks of his paintings? You know, so that what you're talking about is just a process that you have to get yourself through. You just have to get over it. You just have to say, you know, I'm painting for myself and no one else, and that will really, really help you move ahead.
Well, Lynn Schmiel is one of those. It reminds me of you in your talk about design and composition, because he's very fascinated by pushing the envelope with compositional design. And I attended a lecture by him. It was just blew my mind. I thought, oh man, I gotta up this game a little bit here. I agree. He's just really good at that.
Yeah, his paintings are complete abstraction in my mind.
Yeah.
You know, when you're, like I said, when you're a beginner, you're dealing with reality, and advanced, you're dealing with the emotion. Then at a master level, definitely it's abstraction. You start to lose almost everything but abstraction. And one practice thing you can do as a beginner, which I still do, is I have a notebook. It's here somewhere, and I take a Sharpie pen. And the Sharpie pen is the best thing to use because you can't erase, and you go outside and you look at your composition, and you only use the Sharpie pen to put in the darks and leave the light. And you do it really fast. And that's your abstraction. And the abstraction is one of the most important things underneath a painting that holds the painting together. The abstraction is what attracts someone from across the room. The abstraction, I think most people think it's a value study, but it's not. It's almost like in advertising, the subliminal message underneath the ad. It's
that's
very
interesting.
Similar,
yeah.
Very, very similar to that. And that's what Len does. It could be nothing. He could be painting a field of nothing, and it just draws you in and you don't know why. And it's because his abstractions are just perfect. They're really, really well thought out and very clever. So I really admire his work.
And now when we're talking about abstraction, I just want to make sure that we're clear on this. We're not talking about just what a lot of people refer to as abstract art, you know, where it's just, you know, expressionism. We're talking about breaking things down to their, well, you tell me, what does it mean to you, abstraction?
Well, abstraction, that's what the abstract expressionists were doing. They stripped away everything to show everyone this is really what painting is, the abstraction. But as a realistic oil painter, you need to have the abstraction in the painting. It's hidden, but it has to be there to hold everything together. It's the strength of the painting. So the abstraction would be, I guess it's what we were just talking about, the X, the O, the skill yard. Those are the abstractions. When you get very advanced, you don't have to do an X. You don't have to do an O. You don't have to do the triangle. You can do a triangle with an inverted triangle over it. Singer Sargent, he did most of his watercolors outside. There's a really good example. It's a tent. And I posted it, I think, on social media. The entire thing is triangles. And they're inverted, they're pointing, they're doing all these things. The entire painting is about triangles. It's not about the tent. He was playing with the abstraction. And that's something that I think more people should spend time, you know, really understanding when they're outside. Let's see, what would be a good idea? I think with buildings, if you get down the abstraction, it would be, say, everything in the dark would be all black, and then all your light would just have white with some loose lines. Then you take that abstraction and you put it on your painting and you let it dry completely. Then you can go in on top and do your value study of the whole thing. And you want to keep the abstraction underneath where the center of interest is going to be. It needs to line up with the abstractions for the strength of the painting. It's just a layer. It's like the foundation of the painting. So that's what I mean by the abstraction. So it's not the value study. It's the probably, I think Kevin McPherson talked about it in one of his books, but he talks about it more about light and dark.
Yeah.
So I guess you could say it's light and dark. So for me, the abstraction is the light and the dark. So you don't want them equal. You don't want the abstraction equal. You want it to have a strong convergence at some point, and that's usually where the center of interest is. So you can remove your center of interest on a painting. For example, again, my floral series, as a challenge, it's a floral, so it is nature, but I completely removed the horizon line and the center of interest. So why do the paintings still work? Well, they still work because there's an abstraction underneath holding it together. So if you were to photograph it in black and white, you would see the abstraction, how it holds the whole painting together. You have to follow it all the way through the end. You can't paint over it and let it disappear. It has to be there, and you have to constantly work with the abstraction.
So you have to be aware that it's there and not erase it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's your map to the painting. I know it sounds a little bit intense, but
yeah, I'm sweating.
I'm sorry, but
no, this is good. This is good. This is good stuff.
Listen. Right now, at the beginning, you're just trying to make things look like what you're looking at, but then eventually, you're going to say, "Wow, I want to put a little emotion into this," so you'll intensify the color. And then you'll get so good at that, you're going to be bored out of your mind, and you're like, what else can I do? And so then you push your abstraction, which is it's like I'm bending. So in a seascape, I'll bend the composition. So I have one where there's a guy, which I rarely put a figure in my paintings, but there's a guy on the rock, and the abstraction with a wave coming up onto the rock. And I really bent the abstraction really hard and inverted it to look like you're on like the viewer's on a roller coaster heading down the rock towards the water. And that was done with the abstraction. It's just another advanced way of making something more intense. So you feel the energy of the painting, and it holds everything together. It's really necessary, actually. Yeah. There should be more teaching about it. But I guess it is. It's light and dark. So when someone says to you, do a painting all in black and white, you're really working on the abstraction. But unfortunately, people go too far and turn it into a value study. And that's not a value study. It's not. A value study is...
that was going to be my next question. So what differentiates the value study from the abstraction? So let's get the nuts and bolts of that.
Well, I know that you were talking about something about the craft paper.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the reason, first of all, I'm not an expert at everything. This is just my opinion. But the craft paper is
we artists are an opinionated bunch, and I love it.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. But, I won't be held. I'm okay.
I got you.
So the craft paper it's a medium tone. So if you're gonna make a book of craft paper, that's your medium tone. So the only things you need are a highlight and a dark. So the whole point of it is an exercise to go out, or if you're doing a portrait, and you're going to do a quick sketch, and you don't need to do the medium tone. So you're just going to put in the highlight and you're going to put in the dark. And the medium tone is the paper. So it's meant to be an exercise of value. And this is something I learned it really, really long time ago in undergraduate school at two-dimensional design class. But then again, in my master's program, we used the toned paper and we used chalk. We used white chalk and the toned paper and the dark.
I saw Scott Christensen do that.
Yeah, so Scott makes those great books. So, and you can do gray paper. You don't have to do the brown, just as long as it's a medium tone. But you're doing a disservice if you do the whole thing on. If you do every single value, it's not what the purpose. The purpose is to already have the medium value, and you just add the highlight.
I like it. I started making these and using them myself. I'm not good at it yet, but it's fun to work with. I love I use a 80-pound cover stock craft paper.
Yep.
Put them in a 6 by 12 inch binding, and I have fun with it.
Yeah, it's important to explore other materials besides painting because it makes you understand what you're doing with the paint.
Well, it's fun too.
Yeah, it's fun.
Gotta really have fun. A little bit of fun, Michele. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a ton of books with all these type of things, exercises. It warms you up, and then when you're ready to paint, you don't make mistakes.
Do you go back and look at them?
Absolutely. I was just looking at them this morning, and I thought, wow, these look great. I should do more.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is just being lazy. I think that if you carry it around, you only need a white and a black, and you got your midtones. That's all you need. It's a lot more fun to do value study than drawing.
So what are you using for your white and your black?
On the paper?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I like to use a sepia charcoal pencil.
Okay.
And a white charcoal pencil.
Got it.
So it's kind of the white and the darker. It's almost like it's like a burnt umber color. So it's more of a burnt umber. Is it pastel? It might be a pastel pencil. So it's pastel. So I like pastel pencils for that type of exercise because they don't smear as much. They don't smudge all over your hands and all over the place. So it's a charcoal pencil. No, I'm sorry. I keep saying the same thing. Pastel pencil. And it's a burnt umber and a white. And I use either gray paper or craft paper.
Michele, one of the things I like about your paintings is, and I think this comes from my filmmaking background, is I love aspect ratios that are different. Like super wide or square. Back in my photography days, I was doing the Hasselblad square format. And I love that. And Instagram brought that back when it came along. And I just love the square format. And I've noticed that some of your paintings follow that square format or different aspect ratio. And I love that. And I want to know how you go about deciding what aspect ratio are you going to use for your paintings?
Okay, that's very simple. And it's not very interesting. But I found competing in competitions nationally, in order to stand out amongst all these great artists, you need to have something unusual. And what's unusual with the landscape is a square. I've seen other people do circular painting. And if you were walking to a museum and there's 200 pieces of art on the wall, you're going to walk towards those unusual sizes. So that's the simple explanation. I do want to say, though, that it helps me with doing perspective distortion. So if I want to, when I keep talking about inverting the plane, I can make it with a square. It's almost like I'm forcing the viewer up over into an uncomfortable position of looking at, most of these are seascapes, so they're literally hovering over an area where you wouldn't be able to stand. I think because I grew up during photographs were the little, weren't they square?
Oh yeah. Remember the brownie, the Hawkeye brownie camera?
Yeah. So I think that I think in my mind, that is what a picture is. And maybe that is why it's easy for me. I tend to go off the canvas instead of trying to fit everything. It looks like everything is pulled forward really tight, and I do that purposely to create tension. And that's another reason why I use explorers for tension. That makes the viewer feel something instead of walking up and being bored and walking by. They feel uncomfortable because it's not a normal landscape.
Do you think it's discomfort, or is it just they're being recalibrated? You know, their eyes are being recalibrated. You're guiding their eye to see something that they wouldn't normally notice. Or am I totally off base?
Oh, no, you're right on base. So again, like when we talk about a beginner or amateur painter, you're using 1 point perspective and you're using a diagonal vanishing point. And then when you get more advanced, use 2 point, multiple point perspective, and you start doing the bird's eye view, worm's eye view. Your vanishing point changes. There's different things on the canvas. And then when you get to a higher level, then you start with the distortion. The painting is no longer pleasing to the eye because you're bending things in the painting. And I found that a square is easier to do that than a rectangle.
Yeah, I just thought that was fascinating. I don't think it is as boring as you said it was. I think it's interesting.
It's just a design technique. It's a design technique. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just one of those things I'm interested in. It fascinates me because really, I mean, when we're outside observing, you know, our eyes are moving around all over the place, and the portal of the canvas or artboard or whatever we're using is what directs the eye.
That's right. You're in charge. It's your theater, right? You're designing the set. That's your portal for the person to transfer into something else.
Exactly. And sometimes it's really interesting when an artist or even a photographer puts you in a place that you normally wouldn't be. A perspective, a vantage point.
Are you a photographer?
I try to be. Yeah.
Well, see, yeah, just apply if you ever have more experience with photographs, just apply the same principles to your painting. Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be learned from both disciplines, photography and painters. I think early on you were talking about how painting, it slows you down, the observation, you know, you slow down and you look and you observe. And that's why I'm drawn to painting more so than I am even my photography. And the photography is, you're capturing a moment, you are composing, there is an art to it. And the art can be extended by the prints that you do and how you manipulate those prints and things like that. But there's just something about a painting. You're laying one pixel down at a time, over time.
I like the word methodic, to work methodically. So I try to remind myself that when I'm painting, to take my time to revisit a painting years. I try never to throw things out, because most of the times when I get stuck, it's because I haven't learned how to solve the problem that I've suddenly found myself in. And so what I'll do is I'll just put them in a closet and not look at it. And then suddenly it'll dawn on me, that's how I solve that problem, and I'll pull it back out. And so if you revisit it, and then you add your new voice, your new language of what you learned, and it fixes the painting. I know that there are a lot of artists who can work quickly, and there is something about my brush work is really, really fast. I don't know if you've seen on social media when I do my.
I've seen some of it, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When I paint, that's the last 10%. When I'm actually painting color on a painting, it's the last 10%. So 90% of the time would have taken a year before I get to that point, and then that last 10% is done very, very quickly. And I think that's because I work so slow. But the brushwork is quick, and so it gives that spontaneity. And I think that, again, Singer Sargent, I think he did the same thing. I think people always thought his work was done quickly, but it wasn't.
Maybe the stroke that he laid down was quick at that moment, but there was a lot of time and contemplation before it went down.
Exactly. Yeah.
I would have liked to have seen him paint.
Me too.
I mean, I love demos today. You know, I would rather go to a demo than I would a workshop. Yeah, I like to observe painters painting. I've attended a few workshops, and they're good, but I seem to learn more by watching and then going home in the privacy of my studio where I can fail without embarrassment and be slow and methodical and try over and over again to repeat that.
I asked that question on social media. What do you prefer, a workshop or a demo? And I got so many responses, and it seemed to be equal. Some thought it was the same. And my experience. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Did you see that?
See, I responded to that. I'd completely forgotten about that.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. So, but from my experience, I went to Urbanus Barbarian, had a workshop, and I went to his workshop, and on one night, it was a Thursday night, I believe, he had open to the public. You pay, I think it was maybe $100 to sit down. And it was in the evening. It's supposed to start at 9, and I don't think it started until 11. And everyone is sitting in the dark in chairs, and he had spent the day mixing all his paints because you could see it on this huge palette, and he had his floral display that looked like it took hours and hours to put together, and a white canvas. And he came in there and he painted straight for about 4 or 5 hours and didn't say a word. No one said anything. We just sat in the dark. And I learned so much from watching someone get into that groove. So if you can watch someone completely lose themselves while they're painting, watching the action, I think I agree with you, is more exciting, and you learn more than a workshop. I mean, workshops are great, but a demo, when someone's in their full form, it is like nothing else.
Yeah. I think I started going to workshops too soon, and that's how I found it. I found it very educational, but I also found it frustrating because I realized I didn't know enough to really benefit as much as I could have had I had, certain skills down pat.
Well, I did the same thing. I went to workshops, and I was one of those annoying people.
Were you? I can't imagine that.
No, really. I'm really shy, but for some reason, it was my chance, I felt, at a workshop to ask everything I could possibly ask. I wasn't rude in a way of taking over the teacher's time, but when there was an opportunity to ask questions, I had about 100. And I needed that at the time. When I do a demo, I don't mind if everyone's talking and ask questions while I'm working, because I can work and talk at the same time.
I think that's great.
But I know exactly what you're saying. As long as you take notes, if you're a beginner and you're taking notes and you don't know what's going on, those notes are very valuable. Just like if you read Egner Payne's composition of outdoor painting. The first time I read that, I had no idea what was happening. I read it a second time and maybe two things made sense. But over the years, I keep going back and you learn more and more. So it's really important, if you pay the money for a workshop, to really take notes and prepare your questions beforehand. And those questions are where you're at in your journey. And it's important you get them answered to move on.
Yeah,
if you don't get them answered, you're confused.
Well, and you have to learn how to ask the questions. Sometimes you don't know enough to even begin to ask questions, and so you got to do your homework a little bit just so you can do that. At least that's what I've discovered with myself. I realized how much I did not know.
I think your enthusiasm is awesome. I love the questions you ask. I think it's great.
Well, it's because I'm curious.
Everyone's thinking. I know you're very curious. It's very important to keep asking. And I ask the same question. It's just different. Everyone's asking. Right? That's a good thing. That's why I like social media. I think social media is valuable in that manner, because you can ask complete strangers and you get all kinds of great answers and things to think of.
Yeah, I think it's great. And artists by and far have been most generous in sharing that.
I agree. I think as a collective, we need to reach out and help people, because it's not in schools anymore. Well, the college's the college educations I had were incredible. But I'm thinking the grade school kids and preschool kids they're not getting the art that we had. And so when they're adults and they're interested, they don't have the ability to ask questions because they weren't exposed to it. So social media, I see a lot of people want to know how very simple things. They may not like art at all or do art, but they want to know how it's made.
Yeah, it's how they connect.
Yeah.
Exactly. Sometimes people get really, I have, it's rare, thankfully, but I have seen artists get upset at the question when the general public asks the question, well, how long did it take you to paint that? You gotta put yourself in their shoes, the public, because they don't know what's involved, and they're genuinely curious most times. I don't think it's as cynical as trying to calculate a price and that sort of thing. Not, at least not in my experience. It's been people just genuinely want to know what's going on. They're trying to establish a common ground, and I really admire artists that take the time to answer questions when they can. I know we can't always do that, but got deadlines to meet and that sort of thing. But it promotes goodwill among the people that see us.
And even people who aren't artists, my husband says all the time, "Well, how do you know that's a good painting or not?" When we go to a show, he'll just walk around and he'll say, "Well, how do you know that these are experts or masters or whatever?" And first of all, I'll say, "Well, because of the show that it's in." But then I used to not say anything, but now I explain just one thing at a time. And now he's really good at understanding, what it's. I don't know if it's what's good or bad, or it's how it's constructed. It's more about how it's put together.
Yeah, it's a good question because I have it too. How do you know that something's good? When I went to the Scott Christensen and Kwang Ho exhibit at the Booth Museum here in Atlanta, I was just blown away. I mean, I just think, wow, this is incredible. That's what I want to do. I want to do something. I don't want to copy them, but I want to be at that level. There's some ephemeral thing I can't stick my finger on that says, this is really good.
Yes, both of them. I've worked with both of them, and they have I think I mentioned it earlier. It's a technical freedom. So,
technical freedom. I like that.
Technical freedom. So they are free from any thought of how to do something. So they don't spend any time thinking about the value, the color, the drawing. Their whole focus when they're painting is what emotion they want to bring to the work, or everything else comes naturally because they've done it so many times. So imagine if all the energy that you put into just matching one color went into emotion or speaking to the viewer. It changes the painting's strength. I think that they're both in a situation where things are simplifying to symbol. They're becoming more and more abstract, which is from my undergraduate degrees in art history, and I've noticed the pattern of artists in careers, because both of them have a long career, and I think that slowly you move away from realism and you simplify down to abstraction. And I think the reason for that is because that is the hardest thing to do, is to remove anything that's excessive. Because you're always trying to prove to everyone that you can do everything. So all these professional artists are filling and I'm guilty of it, filling the canvas of look what I can do. And then you get to someone at that level and it's all gone. And there's just the simplicity and the beauty of what they were seeing. And it takes you to just a spiritual level. that's what I think we should all strive for. But it's a hard thing to put yourself out there.
But you just have to keep pressing forward, right? Keep painting.
Yeah, I think that, I think have you ever seen the movie, or it's a documentary, The Price of Everything? Have you seen this? You have to see it.
Wait, what's it called again?
It's called The Price of Everything. It's a documentary on HBO. You just type in The Price of Everything documentary, and you can watch it on HBO.
Okay.
And I think it's a filmmaker who made it. And what I noticed in it, so it has everyone. It has the collectors, the dealers, the artists. It talks about what really is happening in the art world right now. And what I think when you start off as an artist, you want to sell a painting because it means that you're communicating to people. And then it quickly changes when you're a professional artist to that art equals money. So you want to prove to everyone that you're selling. There's a huge competition between everyone for money or placement. That's what you see in all these events that's going around. But in this movie, I noticed these are the blue chip artists. So it's very current. And I noticed that every single artist that spoke, not one of them was concerned at all about money. So I think when you can get to that level where your art, it doesn't matter. I guess it's the same thing that I said earlier, that you drop your ego. So once your ego is gone, I think that's one thing that Scott Christensen helped me with, was dropping my ego. Because I used to say to him all the time, I don't think my work is good enough, or I don't think anyone notices my work, and I'm in all these shows, and I just feel this. He's like, what do you care about what everyone thinks? And it was my ego, and it took a lot of time for me to say, I don't care. I don't really care what anyone thinks.
That's a hard lesson to learn, though.
It's really, really hard, because when you're a beginner, that's all you want, is you want to show your painting and tell everyone, I
don't want to paint in a vacuum. I want somebody to see it and say, hey, that's pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. Or yourself. How many times have you looked at your own, like I did this morning, I looked at the notes are pretty good. That's just, you have to
good, right?
Yeah, it feels great, but these guys at that level, they've dropped their ego, and then they can do anything. They are out there just producing this fabulous work because they really don't care what anyone thinks. They are truly in touch with the art form, and I think it's the ego that's in our way. But watch that movie; it's really relevant.
Yeah, thank you for that recommendation. I'll have to check it out, and I'll provide a link for everyone in the show notes for this episode here. Yeah, that ego thing is confessional time here. My wife criticizes me for this. Where I don't feel that my work is good enough, but I think I'm going to take a counterpoint on it just a little bit. I think you have to have a realistic view of your art. I've seen people who thought their artwork was fantastic, and I'm thinking, well, it could use a little work. Maybe that's egotistical of me to even think that. I mean, who am I to judge that, I suppose? But I see something missing in that painting. I should be able to see something that's missing in my painting so that I can elevate it to that point. Now, I'm not going to stay stuck there forever, but I got to have something to compare it with. So I think you got to have a reasonable degree of knowing, yeah, that's not so great. Let's step it up a notch. Does that make sense?
Yes, I agree. I think when you're starting and you're going to all these workshops and learning, you're emulating other people's techniques. Those techniques are the rules. So
yeah,
you're trying to learn the rules of the game, and then when you're professional, you're proficient at them, and you keep repeating them over and over again and getting them better and better. And then finally, like I said, you have technical freedom where you can bend all the rules. And people at that level kind of wink and nod at each other. They know, right?
Yeah.
They walk around an exhibition and they just kind of give each other a little, good job. But if you know, you know. So that was one of the things my husband said. Well, how do you know when you know? And unfortunately, there is a checklist. We talk about it all the time. It's values, color, harmony. We talk about it all the time. But in a painting, it's absolutely necessary that they're all there.
Yeah.
So you do have to slow down and make sure that you absolutely make sure your composition, your drawing's perfect. Then as you move through the painting, you can bend it, like I said. But it has to be done at some point. You can't just go one layer of paint and expect it to be at a level to compete with professional painters.
I can't wait to read your book, Michele.
Yeah, I was just thinking about dog show judges. So, have you ever seen these dog shows?
I've never been to one, but you see them on TV and YouTube and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, my sister shows dogs professionally, and
okay.
I was looking at she was saying that she was going to become a judge, and so I went online to see the qualifications to become a judge, and I almost had a heart attack because it was I think it's the Kennel Club. It was so intense. What you had to do, the years that you had to have experience and to actually show your dogs, whatever. But you had to take courses, you had to pass tests, you had to have interviews. It was so advanced and then I look at the judges that we have for art, and it's random. In a lot of the cases, it could be anyone. It could be someone in the press, or it could be the person who. It
could be a museum curator. Another artist.
Another artist or things like that. But there isn't one group. So this Kennel Club, they have like a newsletter where they let each other all know what's happening across the country. On judging these dogs, and you have to take updated classes. And I thought, why isn't there one for representational art? And I thought, what a great thing that would be. If I'm too busy, but I think that would be great. So you would have to apply to this group and get certified. And then I think if it was more clear, then everyone would know at every exhibition, these are kind of the criteria. I think that would help.
Yeah. Well, I think that kind of goes. So the first question that your husband asks is, how do you know it's good? And then, we have all these judges, but let's turn that around. How does an artist know, should they enter these competitions, and how do they know when they're ready to enter a competition?
Well, you have to start locally and practice with the local clubs and to get your feet wet, and then you move into the national clubs, and each club, like the California Art Club, has a lower level and then a medium and then a higher. And if you learn from those, entering each one, it gets harder and harder, and you have to adjust to the qualifications, and that's how you learn.
Yeah, I've only done very, very local shows. So
that's good. Yeah, I did local shows for years. Yeah,
I just do. Getting my feet wet, see what it's like.
It's supposed to be fun, right, Carl?
Yeah, exactly. And it has been. And when you sell a few too, that's fun too.
Yeah, selling's fun. It's fun. It means you're communicating. You're actually communicating through your painting, which is awesome.
What do you paint on? What's your favorite surfaces to create your artwork?
Well, I like a canvas, a stretch canvas. However, I'm finding that I need to explore a variety of substrates to help increase the emotion in my work. I was at Kwang Ho's studio once, and he had huge pieces of raw canvas just tacked to the wall, and he was painting on it. And I said, Kwang, how long can the paint stay on here before you have to stretch it? And he said, within 3 months. And it just fascinated me that that was possible. So I like to explore. You get to a point where you want to start exploring. I'm using paper, which I love because shows the brush. Yeah. The brush sits on top instead of absorbs in. So I don't have a favorite. I'm exploring different kinds. I'm not quite there where I'm not as advanced as Kwang to move on to copper plates or things like that, but I'm starting to feel that I have to stretch myself into another material. And also I'm utilizing acrylics and charcoal. So I'm starting to push out into multiple media, like mediums, I guess.
Yeah.
Different.
So how are you using the acrylics? Are you using them like as a, to block in or tone a canvas, or what are you doing with those?
No, I'm using them in addition. So you can do an oil paint with charcoal and acrylic and oil, all in one.
So a mixed media type painting, is that?
Yeah, mixed media.
Very nice. Yeah. So the canvas, is it a linen or a cotton, or do you use both? Or
I use a linen canvas, and I use for plein air, I use those New Traditions linen boards. I believe that as a beginner, you should use the cheapest materials possible because you're really not understanding how they work. Once you get to a point where you're frustrated, you can't do something, and it's because of your materials, then you move into a more expensive material. And a good example of that is paint. So student grade paints are probably the best option when you are learning color harmony. And then when you move into an area of painting where you want to start doing warm and cools, you need to upgrade your paint. And then when you get to a point where you're actually utilizing emotion in the brushwork, then you need to have a high quality. Like I use Vasari paint because it's so pure that the color, I can see while I'm painting, I know what dries flat and what dries shiny. And I don't need to use medium anymore to put on top of that later to even it all out, because I can utilize the gloss and the flat within the painting. So as you start to get frustrated, it's because your products need to upgrade, then you suddenly can start doing more things. So I use Vasari paint.
So you don't use any mediums?
I do not use any medium because Vasari paints you do not need a medium. It is pure linseed oil coming out of that tube. You want to hang them inverted so the oil goes to the tip. It's one of the, I can put it out on my palette and it can stay there up to a week without drying up. Now, if I were to put a lesser grade paint next to it, within 48 hours, the whole top will be all thick and sticky and there'll be little chunks in it. Yeah.
So no solvents or anything like that as well? Or
the only thing I do use is I use walnut oil to rest my brushes in. So when I'm not using them, I just set them in there. So I don't believe in washing brushes because I think it ruins the brush. I use rosemary brushes. I use for synthetic brushes, the ivories. I like the ivory long silver and the ivory long black.
The synthetic?
Yes, they're white. So they're synthetic. I find that I have the best brush control with them because of the edges. The edges are incredible. And, if I were to do...
I got to try that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Try them. They're absolutely fabulous. They're really, really great because the paint needs to stay at the very tip of the brush. It should never go into the ferrule. And these synthetic brushes, you're able to have the paint sit on the edge and not get caught up in the brush. So when you apply the paint onto the canvas, you're literally spreading the paint without a brush interfering with it. So it gives this gorgeous, thick impasto texture. Especially if you work in layers like I do, you want to be able to create a texture. Now, I will use cold wax once in a while if I'm working rocks or the spray in the water. And the cold wax is a gambling product. And are you familiar with cold wax?
Yeah, I actually have experimented a little bit with it. I can't say that I've really learned how to master it yet, but it's kind of interesting to add texture.
You have to practice.
Yeah.
You have to practice there. If you go online on their website and read about, you want to have the right quantity. So if I think it's a third, you don't want to have anything more than a third compared to the paint. So you don't want to use too much or it's too waxy. So if you're mixing it with paint, you can also use cold wax on top of the paint. So it's like instead of a varnish.
Is that because, see, when I think of cold wax, I think that's probably beeswax is what it is.
It is. Yeah.
Which never hardens. And so you'd have to have something in it to help it harden to match the rest of the surface of the painting. Is that correct?
In the paint, it looks like little tiny bubbles. Now, when I use it on top of the entire painting as a kind of like a varnish, but just on top, it dries. It just has a muted matte look.
Right.
Yeah, it dries very quickly. If you put out some cold wax on your palette, it'll be dry by the next day. So you need to cover it with some sort of saran wrap.
I need to experiment with it more. Well, there's just so many things to try and experiment, and I'm still, trying to master the fundamentals. I'll do it out of curiosity, but sometimes I try it and then I put it on hold until I get better at something and then I can incorporate it. But that's interesting that you use that.
Well, think about this. Think about when you're doing the painting and you want to make an effect. Then you want to think, what in my arsenal do I have that can make that effect? That's when you want to pull something out like that. It shouldn't be something that you use throughout the painting. It's something for a very specific reason. And that's when you use these other things. But you should strictly, I think, in my opinion, you should stick with paint. And then and always let the painting dry before you use cold wax to try to give it that bumpy feeling. It won't work on wet paint. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. Very good to know. You're laying the foundation for what the painting's going to become. How do you approach that?
Okay, so my training has been a variety of ways, and I've tried them all. I tried the grid? There's a grid that I was very surprised. Kevin McPherson showed us how to do that at a workshop. He had a plein air painting, and then we came into his studio, and he had a huge grid on his painting, and he went from square to square, and I found that to be fascinating that someone would do that. It never crossed my mind, but it doesn't work for me. I'm a type of painter that needs to work the entire canvas at once. Doing one section and moving across or moving down just doesn't work for me because I'm a very fluid, fast painter. I think in school we used there's some sort of paper that you can lay on your design and then it transfers it and then you could put it onto a canvas. I never liked that and I don't see how I could do that on a big canvas. So that wasn't very comfortable.
Yeah, that would get it looks like that would get unwieldy. I don't know, but I've never done that.
And then I have the best story of all time. I was asked by a friend to do a massive mural for an auction, a benefit. It was a benefit. And so I said, sure.
Well, that must have been exciting.
Yeah, sure. No, this wasn't during the benefit. It was prior to the benefit. I was going to come in and do a mural. So I thought it's going to be this massive thing on the wall. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to get a projector and I'm going to do the drawing and I'm going to project it onto the wall and I'm going to paint it. And it's going to be easy and that's it. Have my ladder and be done with it. So I show up and it's morning and the entire front of the building is a glass window and the wall is directly next to the window.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Yeah. And all these people who are the volunteers are standing there. They're going to watch me. And so I thought to myself, oh my God, it never dawned on me that I wouldn't be in the dark and be able to project it and pencil it out and then get up and do the thing.
So what was plan B?
Plan B was to wing it. And so I had no other option. There wasn't much time. So I literally just had the paper in my hand and I just got up on the ladder. And for some reason, I was able to do it without measuring, without having to get down and look. It's just, I think because when I look at a canvas, when I look at a figure, this is a good analogy. If I'm with a live figure and I'm looking at the body and I have my paper in front of me, I see dots. So I see a dot at the chin, the shoulder, the elbow, and in my mind I'm comparing the distances, but it's all of it at once. I'm not measuring the length of anything. I'm measuring the distance between all the dots. So that's kind of how I draw. And I didn't realize that I was able to do that until I was put in that position. So one of the things I encourage everyone is to put yourself in a situation that's very uncomfortable where you have to rely on your basic skills that you don't even know you have. And you'll be surprised at what you can do. Because I think that if I were always doing the grid, I just think of how awful my paintings would look because I'd be forcing myself. So if you're transferring, whether it is a projection or a grid or a transfer or I don't know what other things there are, but if it looks awkward, it's because it's not natural to you and you need to try something else. I'm fortunate where I can just look at something and draw it bigger. I think that's why my canvases are so big, because it comes natural to me to go bigger. I have a harder time going smaller. So going smaller for me, for some reason, is very difficult. So I think you'll only see bigger from me. Yeah. So that's how I found that I can just draw and without I just comparing space. The abstraction. Remember I told you have to get the abstraction?
Well, and I think too, when you look back at your very disciplined approach to learning, the practice that you put in, all of those things contributed to your ability to respond to that. At that moment, probably seemed like a really desperate situation, but you pulled it off because of the experience that you had developed over a period of time.
I think so, but I don't ever remember. I do. Okay. So in grade school, I was asked to do a mural. And when I was in fourth or fifth grade, I was asked to do a school mural. So yeah, maybe that was my experience.
Well, see, there you see, I rest my case.
Yeah. And then that builds up the point that a lot of kids now aren't getting that experience of art in school. And so as adults, they have a lot of questions, because they don't really have no experience. So yeah, I agree with you. The more we can be honest and share how we do things, the more people will try different things and then find their own voice. So finding your voice is basically learning how to utilize what you're best at and not trying to copy someone else or follow another style. I understand that people follow, a master artist. They're leaders, but I don't understand why they would want to copy the exact style, even if it's an expert, rendition of it.
The artists that I've interviewed on this podcast, artists that I've taken workshops from, I don't want to copy their style. I don't want to be known as a Matt Smith or a Ralph Oberg or I mean, I'd love to have their reputation, but that's their voice, and they do a magnificent job. Lynn Schmiel, I love their stuff. I really do. But I want to do my thing. I don't know what that thing is yet because I haven't done enough of it, but it's beginning to show. I'm beginning to see what I'm interested in. And it's kind of like handwriting in a way. Everybody's got their own unique way of writing letters and words and sentences. And I think that's the way painting is sometimes. You just, your mark is going to be left no matter what.
Right. I think you're right. When you're a student and you're going to workshops, you're learning someone else's technique. And then when you start feeling that you can teach and you look for a mentor, the mentor advises you on your own, strength. And then when you're a master, you tend to be isolated because you're on your own path. You're not following anyone, but you all of a sudden have all these followers, which must be really difficult for these top artists that have people mimicking their work. I mean, it's an honor in one way, but it must be somewhat of a pressure. I don't know, but
sure.
I guess that's the price you pay for being great.
In addition to developing your skill as an artist, you started relatively later in life, which appeals to me because I've started much later than you did. But I find encouragement in seeing people take a very methodical approach to developing their skills and their career. In this, it says, hey, you can do this. Granted, I'll never be a Lynn Schmiel because I've not there's no way in my lifespan that I can duplicate what he did, but I can give it a good run for the money. I'm going to try. I agree.
It's never too late. It's never too late. If you look at the careers of artists, I love going to retrospects. I love going to big retrospects like de Kooning. I went to his in New York City, and the very beginning, everything was so realistic, and then it pushed into abstract, and then it just each decade the work was so different. And at the very end, before he died, there was these long ribbons of just paint. Like it looked like he literally was wheeled across the room and he just had a brush dragging across the thing. And it just made me realize that, to be a great artist, you need to have the experience of life. And, we have so many great artists that in our, around us now who are in their 20s, technically, but they haven't lived the experience of life that someone like you or I have. When you get to a high level, those are the most important things that you're putting in your work is the experiences that you've had. And so if you're an older student, I think I started my master's degree when I was 47, and I took 3 years to do it instead of 2 because I had the opportunity to spend longer time so I could really focus. It made me push ahead faster than if I was in my 20s during my master's because of the maturity. So most people who are retiring, I think this is the best time. When I think Eric Rhodes said to me something about he was wishing that he could be at a higher level of painting. And I said, well, Eric, your marketing, what you're doing is at a high level. I said, the day that you stop doing that and put all that energy into your painting, then you're going to be at a high level. So I think a lot of it is focus and commitment to what your goal of what you want to do. I think you sound like you have so many different things going on that obviously, but if you stopped doing everything except painting, where would you be?
I'd be a lot further along.
Exactly.
But I don't want to do that, So these
then
are
you have to be happy with that.
That's right.
You have to be happy with that.
Yeah. Ralph Oberg told me, he said, be happy with the process. So that's what I'm going to do.
That's right. It is a process. I just started taking golf. I've never picked up a club in my life. And I realized my coach or whatever he is, he said, well, I need to take a few weeks off to have a hip replacement. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I'm going to take up this new sport, but physically I'll only be able to do it for a few years before I'm going to be hurt. So I think with painting, it's, you can do artistic painting, drawing, wherever. I mean, I think everyone should try. There's so many people on social media that reach out to me that have nothing to do with art, but really want to try it. And I think these plein air events are great because they're seeing it. But I've always tried to encourage young people, women, and older people that, why not? I did it. I went from nothing, terrible work, to national shows, to a solo museum show. I mean, if I can do it, anyone can do it.
I think that's awesome. You're an inspiration, Michele. Thank
you. I'm trying to be. That's what my focus on social media is just to let it out. Just like, this is what it is, and try it.
I noticed you have a very different approach to advertising, which I was impressed with.
There is a reason for that.
Well, let me explain to our listeners in case they haven't. So when you advertise, like I think the first time I saw you was in, I think it was Fine Art Connoisseur, but it's a full picture of you. You don't see your artwork in the picture. And that really stood out from all the other pictures, all the other ads. And I thought, well, that's pretty clever to do that. What made you think to take that approach?
Well, I cannot take any credit because I have a marketing team, and I hired them in Santa Cruz. It's called Energy Design. And I went to them and I said, I have a problem. No one knows who I am. I was married prior to my husband now, and I had a different last name. And then I switched names. Well, I went with my old name, and then I did just my first name, and then I switched to another last name, which confused all the people. I'm an art collector. So when I go to shows or exhibitions, sometimes I go as a collector and people didn't know that I was a painter. Then when you look at my work, I have very different styles. My seascapes are very representational, traditional, and then my florals are pushing more of the abstract. And then I also like to do very abstract work that I haven't really, or portraits that haven't been out there yet, but they're totally different. And I went to them and I said, you know what? I'm so confused about myself. How can I possibly market myself? And so what they did was they gave me a questionnaire about, what car do you envision yourself? And, they asked me all these crazy questions. And in the end, they decided that they were going to market me and my name. So one of the things you'll see on it's just me and my name across there. So that is the focus of the marketing campaign. So whenever someone sees my picture, the name will be associated with it. And then whatever artwork I may be working on, because I believe that most artists every decade move into another form or style or series. I knew that I didn't want to be pinned down as a seascape artist, especially the way we're traveling and moving from state to state.
Right.
So I felt this was the best direction. I'm shy, and I felt a little bit that it was going to be too much, but it actually worked. Like you said, I had calls from the editors or the owners, right? Yeah, of the publishers of the magazines, and they said that they had calls and that they were really impressed. It was refreshing. I have a new ad that just came out we are moving to Arizona as we speak, actually, and so it'll be a new market for me. So it's a new ad, but it is just from the photographs. The photographs are from a New York City photographer, Pete Thompson. He was hired by Energy Design. So I had nothing to do with it. I had, I had the whole thing.
Yeah, but you had everything to do with it because you made that decision to reach out to someone for help. And what a brilliant move that was.
Absolutely. I think if you're out there and you're professional and your focus is not on marketing, then you need to hire someone. It's crucial at this point, especially with social media, because that's the future. If you notice with the upgrades to your phones, they're hard to see the pictures are turning into videos for a reason, because everything's going to be video. So the more you practice video, the better you're going to be at it, because it's coming fast.
Very good.
Yeah. Yeah, I did definitely reach out. If you have the money and the time, or there's a lot of people who will do, students who will do things for you, or your children. Like, I rely on my children a lot to help me. But yeah, definitely, it's very important.
Very nice. Michele, I think there's an entire book in you. I would love to keep talking, but
I don't know how long it's been, but I do have one. I had a question where you said you came across my work on Fine Art Connoisseur magazine, but is that where you've heard about my work? You haven't seen it in person?
I have not seen it in person. I would like to see it in person. See, I'm in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. And I haven't traveled anywhere where your work is on exhibit, so I haven't seen it yet. I would like to, but I was intrigued by what I saw. I did see it. I did see it. It was back in, I guess sometime last year, spring of last year, I think is when I first came across. And there was an article about you, and I liked your artwork. So
perfect.
That's how I
always
found it.
That's how great.
I hope that's good, positive feedback for you. I do. I like the artwork, and I was attracted to the story behind it. The fact that you got started later, your approach to painting, all of those things are fascinating, and I'm very grateful to you that you've taken the time to share it with me in detail today, and to my audience. I think there's something here for everyone. I think they'll find this a very valuable episode to listen to. Where can they find out more about you, Michele?
Oh, they just need to type my name, Michele, with 2 L's and Jung on the computer, and up will come all kinds of things on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. My website is michellejungstudios.com, but even if you press, just type in Michele Jung, that'll come up. If you join my newsletter on my website, I do send out newsletters that you get a little heads up before other people, things happening. I have an auction coming up, and, things like that, just that you wouldn't see on social media, but because not everyone has social media, I found out. I do mailing. So if you get on that newsletter, I will send out a mailing also. But thank you so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we'll cross paths. I would recommend, have you been to the Plein Air Convention in Denver that's this year? Have you been in the past?
No, I've heard a lot of people talk about it. Denver would be a really nice location to go. My daughter lives in Colorado, and I love going to Colorado.
And you need to go. You need to absolutely go, because they have this huge exposition hall where you can try the rosemary brushes and all the different supplies. You get samples and ask questions. They're experts, but it's pretty intense and exciting all week. So I would recommend to do that for your learning experience.
All right, you've twisted my arm in a good way.
Yeah, go, and then you can have a little, or I can host a little party of all your podcast members.
Oh, that would be cool. That's a good idea. I don't know how many. I know
Brian Ruttenberg. He's one of my favorite artists. I love his life. I had one of his paintings, I would die, but I love watching him on the video. He's so intelligent, and he's so fun, and he's just such a great person. And I was so surprised that he was on your podcast.
I was too. But he's a man of unconventional wisdom, when it comes to painting. So I was really happy to have him on. Yeah. Well, what's neat about him? A lot of us want to be all over the place. I'm one of those guys. I want to experiment with many different styles and different things, because this is all fun. It's almost like throwing mud on the wall and see what sticks, right? But It's fascinating to me. But he has chosen to do one thing and do that very one thing well. He has found what works for him, what he enjoys doing, and he does it extremely well. And he embraces that repetition. And I think, wow, that works for him.
Humble.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, he has so much joy and honesty. It's so refreshing. I was so happy to see him on your list. I don't know if everyone in our representational field knows about him. So I think that was a great interview.
My audience started off primarily with representational people, but see, my interest goes beyond the representational. I do like what Brian Rutenberg does, and it's just, I like different styles of art, and I think it all has a place. So I hope the podcast proves to be a place where it's a melting pot of different ideas that artists and collectors and people who like art, can enjoy that. It's a slow build as I do this, but it's fun, and I get to talk to some pretty amazing people that inspire me. So it's a fringe benefit that I get just by being able to talk to you and other folks. And I hope my audience gets to share that joy or feel my joy in being able to talk to people. As crazy as I am sometimes.
Well, just when you're in front of the canvas, just remember what I said, to slow down.
Slow down, okay.
Slow down.
No speed painting for me.
Down. Work methodically.
Okay.
Work methodically. Yeah. And then when you get stuck, just put it away until you've learned how to fix it. Don't ruin it. Just put it away.
Well, I've ruined it. And you'll be there. No, in all seriousness, no, that is good advice, and I appreciate that. I'll remember that.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Great. Well, thanks. It was wonderful talking to you.
It's a real honor to have talked to you. Thank you for joining me on the Artful Painter.
Thank you, Carl.
I have to say, I very much enjoyed that conversation with Michele Jung. She was so generous. She was humble. She was modest. And she was so willing to share her process, her thoughts on painting, her thoughts on learning, just so much information there. So I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you want to find out more about Michele, go to her website and her social media. I have all the links in the show notes for this episode to her website. I want to thank you too for the continued feedback for this show. It is awesome. I really appreciate it very much. Lorenzo Chavez, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. He wrote and said, "Hi, Carl. Thank you for your inspiring podcast. Cheers." And I went and checked his website, and he is an amazing artist. I'm going to have to get him on the show. Lorenzo Chavez or Chavez. Oh my goodness. Lorenzo, I apologize in advance for mispronouncing your name. But anyway, thank you so much for the feedback. I had this feedback from, let's see, who is it? Oh, yeah, Margie Miller. She says, so enjoying your podcast and videos. And then she goes on to mention how in a recent studio tour, this is where I did a video on my YouTube channel. And so she asked if I could clarify what monitor and rolling stand setup that I purchased for about $300. And I will create a video for everyone on that and share it with you in the future. But thank you so much, Margie. I appreciate that feedback. Also, Sand Dollar Studio. I've heard from them before, and I appreciate it. And I like repeat feedback, so this is good. She says, I assume I don't know if it's a he or a she. That's a good question. It doesn't matter. Sand Dollar Studio says, thank you very much, Carl, for this very interesting podcast. Now, she's talking about the one that I released last week featuring Virgil Elliott. So thank you, Sand Dollar Studio, for your continued support. This one is from Marcia Lemon. Carl, I haven't listened to the episode yet, and what she's talking about is the one with Kathy Odom. That's number 14, I think, episode number 14. But she explains why. She says, it's like a box of chocolates. I save your podcast for when I can listen all the way through. Now, I know that's been a challenge of late because some of these podcasts, including this one, approach nearly 2 hours. I don't always do that, but sometimes I do. So anyway, I know that's quite a long session to listen to. But anyway, I've never had my podcast likened to a box of chocolates. Yeah, that's cool. Anyway, she continues. She says, I have so enjoyed the people you have interviewed so far. There is a real void, I think, for the interviews of the artists you have talked to, the wildlife and Western genre artists. There just aren't on any interviews. Marcia, I agree with you that I think there's a void there, and I am working hard to get more of the artists that are in that genre on this show. It's not easy scheduling these, with my schedule and their schedule. They're very busy, so it's not an easy thing. Some are covered, but from I know Eric Rhodes' Plein Air podcast. He's talked to a number of them, but it's that podcast focus is primarily on outdoor painting. So I'm going to see what I can do. Okay. So that is a good suggestion. Marcia continues with her feedback. She says, you have a gift for interviews. I listened to a number of them, but yours has worked its way up to the top once I found your podcast. Top notch. It seems they are comfortable and talk about not only their journey, but the depth of working progress is really valuable. Thanks for the hard work and looking forward to many more. Marcia, thank you so much for your kind feedback. It's very much appreciated. But I have to give credit to the artists that I interview. They're the ones that make this show. Their generosity in sharing their experience and their knowledge is just fantastic. I really appreciate that. I do want to take a moment just to talk about the audio quality of this podcast. Now, what I have to do a lot of times is call people on their cell phones. They do not have a studio. I have a studio in my office. It's a small one, and that's why my voice sounds the way it does. I have the microphone and the mixer and the channel strips and the audio interfaces and that sort of thing. So it sounds pretty good on this end, but what I have to do is dial them in. Most of the time, I have to call them on their cell phones. And so that's why you will hear, it won't sound like you're listening to NPR. But I will say, sometimes you'll be listening to NPR and you'll hear them talking to someone on a cell phone. So there, I would love to be able to bring them into my studio, but that's an expensive proposition. I just can't do that. So this is a good compromise where I can stay in my studio, they can stay in their studio, and we can talk over the phone. I think the content that they provide is fantastic. And if you don't mind putting up with a little bit of bad audio quality, I think it makes it worthwhile. So thank you for your patience about that. I do love hearing from everyone. It's very highly motivational to me. So if you want to send a note, go to my website at carlolson.tv and click the contact tab. You will see a form there where you can send me a message. Thank you for listening to The Artful Painter. I will see you in the next episode.
picture on the TV.